Would you like to admit that you're wrong about this?
No, you're not understanding it.
Will you concede that in order for some sort of conspiracy or something like that to occur, you wouldn't need someone admitting it to be able to say that it occurred?
I just need give me a single shred of evidence.
Will you concede that?
Okay. I will concede this entire point to you.
Thank you. So you acknowledge there was a prior ICA? Yes?
In September, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So would you also acknowledge that that ICA did not say that Russia interfered to help Trump?
Correct.
So then my statement is correct. So the point is, right, that there was...
But that doesn't mean that the ICA was built, anything in the ICA wasn't built off of stuff from the dossier.
Well, there was stuff...
Or in the ICA that, yeah.
Look, I'm actually, like, the Steele dossier, believe it or not, would be the strongest evidence that Russia interfered to help Trump, right? So I don't think it's helping your case to say, like, what didn't...
Wait, wouldn't the strongest evidence be the fact that they hacked the DNC and they hacked the DCCC email servers?
No, that doesn't speak to their...
timely leaks of that?
That doesn't speak to their motivation as to whether or not they were trying to help Trump or not. It speaks to their motivation that they were getting access to everything they could to interfere in our system. But the motivation of specifically helping Trump was nothing that was ever determined prior to December 8th. We'll get to this in a second.
So what didn't Putin expressing a preference for Donald Trump as a leader, leaking explicitly things that are anti-Hillary Clinton, and the fact that all the Mueller indictments, investigations, and the Internet Research Agency, all of them were on attacks against Clinton. That's just all coincidence. They were just trying to
Okay, if that's all true, why was none of that included in the ICA? Why didn't they include anything about the Internet Research Agency or any of that nature? They included three pieces. They didn't.
Hold on. Not only, I believe they did, because I think that Prigozhin, is mentioned in the ICA as being a potential funder for, I don't know if they say Internet Research Agency by name, but I think that they say that there were, I don't know if the investigation, because it was just the ICA for what they currently had. I think that deep into the investigation didn't happen until Mueller got his hands on things, but I think they named Prigozhin as being one of the oligarchical funders of some of the foreign propaganda that came out of that ICA, which ended up being the Internet Research Agency.
I'm not sure.
There's another reason why I think it's silly to attack the ICA, because everything that was in the ICA was true. So attacking this as some like Obama propaganda piece, every single thing in there is true. We now know is even more true than we knew before.
It's not true, right? What we're talking about is when the ICA was... So again, we're getting off track from the 3 points that were any evidence that was given in the ICA that said that the motivation of Russia was to help Trump. All you're saying is, yeah, but they hacked Hillary, right? But that doesn't speak to their motivation, right? And so... We'll go back to this. The timeline real quick was, you acknowledge this, that December 8th, it wasn't officially an intelligence community assessment, but there was an intelligence assessment that was given to Barack Obama that basically said, and this is the first Tulsi file that was released, Russia didn't have effects in cyber hacking of our election infrastructure. You're aware of this, 100-something page document that Tulsi releases?
Yeah, it's a smorgasbord of random things. It includes both of the ICAs and a bunch of random emails. Yeah, what about it?
Okay, so that said, that was being presented to Obama in December 8th, 2016. And basically nowhere in that report does it say that the motivation of Russia was to help Trump win. There is nowhere that I could find anywhere prior to December 8th that there was any intelligence assessment ever in the United States that said that Russia's motivation was anything other than them monkeying with our election systems to sow distrust. None of it ever said that they were interfering to help Donald Trump. Can you provide me any evidence to the contrary?
I don't think they had reached that assessment yet. But it was that ICA that you're talking about came out on September 9th, right?
Correct.
So there was months of more intelligence gathering before the future one that would be released in January came out. So we wouldn't expect the one in January to be the exact same. No.
So just so we're clear, so we're both on the same page prior to December 8th. Then this report comes out December 8th. Obama immediately the next day calls a meeting, and it has all the characters, Comey, Clapper, all these people. And Clapper ends up releasing an email after that meeting saying, hey, Obama's ordered us to do a new ICA. You agree with this?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't think there was ever. I think that there was. I believe that the first ICA that we talk about comes out on September of 2016. And then I think eventually there is a big meeting because Obama wants to be able to release something relating to all of the attacks that Russia had done on our election, because it was probably the worst year where we've ever had foreign intrusion. And Obama wants the ICA or wants the intelligence community to put out some kind of statement, just detailing what had happened. And then all of the intelligence community cabinet heads and everybody else meets, and they, then they.
Okay, so I think you're functionally wrong. According to a DNI files, I could send you this on page 7. It says, quote, After the meeting, according to the Office of Director of National Intelligence, Clapper's executive assistant emailed intelligence community leaders, tasking them to create a new intelligence community assessment per the president's request that detailed the tools Moscow used and the actions it took to influence the 2016 election. Quote, ODNI will lead this effort with participation of CIA, FBI, NSA, and DHS. That was December 9th. So you're factually incorrect.
Correct. But what you're saying, no.
Yes.
When do you think, when they say put together a new thing, what do you think new thing? Do you think that they just saw one and they want a new one put together right now? They're just saying we want to put together one. We want to put together one.
No, that's
not like they showed him one and he didn't like it and now they want to do a new one.
That's not true. The December 8th briefing that was given to him was delayed to be released to public, and Obama called a meeting the next day and said, I want you all to put together a new thing. Now, it strongly suggests what happened was...
but if you read, you mentioned a 112-page thing, 170-page thing linked by Tulsi Gabbard. There is no December 8th ICA. That's not true. I've never seen that. Or can you show me that?
Yes, I'll see if I can find the link to that.
The only two ICA are the September 12th, 2016 ICA, and then there is the January 6th ICA from 2017. I believe that the reason why Obama wanted to test that as well is because I think during that meeting or the day before, because on December 7th, after the election, the talking points that had been prepared for Clapper were saying that the U.S., because now the U.S. Intelligence Committee had high confidence in its attribution of the intrusions into the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, DCCC networks, based on the forensic evidence identified by a private cyber firm and the IC's review and understanding of cyber activities by the Russian government. I don't believe in the September ICA. I don't think they had high confidence that Guccifer 2.0 was the GRU. They didn't know that, they didn't have high confidence that that was Russian yet. But by the time December had rolled around, they did have high confidence. That was presented to Obama. Once Obama heard that, he was like, okay, well, you guys should put together a new ICA, but you're presenting this, and I know that some headlines have presented this as though he was given some information on the 8th, and he was like, no, I want something different on the 9th. But that new ICA was not in response to getting one he didn't like. It was just he wanted a new ICA put together, now with the updated intelligence.
No, so he did receive a report December 8th. Give me 1 second. I'll bring it up here. So this is approved for release by the DNI on July 17th, 2025. Let's see. This was sent...
Wait, what?
This was
July 17th, 2025?
This was approved. It was approved for release, so it was classified until that point on July 2025. This is pulled from the December PPD draft for the president, December 8th, 2016. Cyber manipulation of U.S. election infrastructure to remain a challenge. In this, it says, quote, on page 1, we have low to moderate confidence in Russia government's involvement because of our uncertainty about its utility for a state actor, a lack of observed effects from low-profile operation, and the actor's use of lack of obfuscation techniques, which included substantial overlap with criminal actors using similar targeting patterns and tactics. The activities did coincide with high-profile Russia cyber-enabled data leaks during the election, which we assess probably were intended to cause psychological effects such as undermining the credibility of the election process and candidates. In other words, the conclusion, again, you're factually incorrect. This was sent to Obama on December 8th, and in this, they assessed that the motivation was, and I quote, the undermining the credibility of the election process and candidates. So Obama immediately...
So what you're reading is not... So number one, what you're reading is not an ICA. Number one, that's just a briefing. That's a... Sure, but we're talking about ICAs. So now you've gone down to the president's daily briefing. So one, that's not an ICA. Two, you're just reading the second bullet point from a bunch of random things that are brought up, or not random, but a bunch of things that are brought up. You read the low to moderate confidence in the Russian government's involvement because of uncertainty about its utility for state actor. Above that, they bring up the idea that there is a possible Russian government-affiliated cyber actors extracting voter data from Illinois Board of Elections. I think there's several other points in here about this, but none of this has to do, the goal of this was not assessing whether or not Russia wanted to attack or what the motivations of Putin were. The title of this briefing was Cyber Manipulation of U.S. Election Infrastructure to Remain a Challenge. That's what this briefing was about. And then after Obama got this briefing, he wanted a more comprehensive intelligence community assessment done rather than just a president daily briefing. He wanted all of the intelligence communities to come together and do their research and put together what they thought was the strongest version of what actually happened.
So again, up until this point, there was no confirmation that Russia or any claim whatsoever made by an intelligence community that said that Russia interfered to help Trump as part of their motivation. Second, I admitted when I started...
They hadn't been tasked with exploring that
Come
yet.
on, please. I let you talk. Secondly, I didn't say this was an intelligence...
Well, do you acknowledge that just on the first point? They weren't tasked with exploring that yet, right?
No, of course they were.
That's what Obama tasked them to explore, right? He didn't tell them, I need you to make this up. He just said, can you put together what we have on this?
So your argument is the intelligence community that was putting ICAs together in September was never trying to look into the motivation. They were never tasked with that. That our intelligence community...
No, I'm sure they were looking for it, but they didn't have it at that point.
Okay, so then you're factually, again, incorrect when you say they weren't tasked with that prior. Of course they were tasked with trying to find the motivations of the actors they think are interfering in our country. So that's
No, I'm
nonsensical.
saying tasked during the president's daily briefing. That's not what they were tasked with.
Right. Well, it doesn't matter if the president directly tells them. They understand implicitly that's their job. Now, I never said this was an ICA. I said it was sort of an intelligence briefing that was given that the president got. He gets this on the 8th. He says that it shouldn't be released publicly. And instead, he calls this meeting and immediately says, hey, we want an assessment, this overarching assessment, and doesn't release this. Again, it doesn't matter if the primary intent of this was to look at whether or not, and it's basically saying the intent, what they find out is Russia didn't affect the election results through cyber effects and hacking election infrastructure. But it does speak to the motivation.
Which we already know, yeah.
Right. But it does speak to the motivation. It says that the motivation that this intelligence assessment's concluding, or this intelligence briefing's concluding, is that they were trying to cause psychological effects such as undermining the credibility of the election process. So then the next day,
no, that's not true. There's nothing in here that says that. You're incorrect. That's not what they're assessing.
And I'm quoting, the activities did coincide with high-profile Russia cyber-enabled data leaks during the election, which we assess probably were intended to cause psychological effects, such as undermining the credibility of the election process and candidates. Not to help
Correct.
Donald Trump
So
win.
if you actually, I understand. So if you actually read any of the earlier ICAs, I read both of them. The reason why they have that included in there is because the article, the PBD that you're reading, or the president's daily briefing that you're reading, is about cyber manipulation and whether or not they were trying to literally flip the vote tallies to pick one winner or another. One of the things that the prior ICA had been tasked with is figuring out, do we think that Russia has the capability to do this? And they said, no, we don't. But we do think that what they can do is they can engage in, even if they're successful in a small scale at changing one county or something, that in and of itself would be enough to undermine public confidence. That's the psychological warfare that they're talking about. They're not talking about the motivations here. They're just talking about what the goal might be for any type of individual election-related system hack. If you want, I can source that directly from one of the earlier ICAs. If you give me 2 seconds, I can find that for you.
You can find it. I don't disagree
nothing...
with. I've read. I don't disagree. What I'm saying is the motivations through Russia election hacking activities from 2012, 2008. If you read any of the ICAs back then, they're always talking about how the entire goal of Russia is just to meddle with.
We're not talking about 2012 to 2028. They also say that 2016 was the most extreme and the most outlandish that Russia has ever attacked our system.
So nonetheless, without you interfering all the time, so what I'm saying is they never came to the conclusion that the motivation was to help one candidate over the other. They never said that.
But they did. In January 6th, they did.
Is this just going to be that you have to spur out and interrupt the whole time?
Well, I just need you to not lie. If we can ask for a judge ruling on this if you want, but when they say psychological tactics, that's not talking about whether or not they wanted to broadly attack our system or favor one candidate or another. It's talking about the nature of the election attack that they were engaged in. And the nature of that attack wasn't to try to flip all the votes. It was to try to undermine the faith in the particular voting system. That would be the type of election attack that they would launch. This doesn't say whether or not they prefer one candidate or another candidate.
I disagree with you. Let's read what it says specifically right before it says that, okay? It says, I'm going to pause. This is a time for you to interrupt, like on cue. You ready? And I'll pause when I want your answer. You ready? The activities did coincide with high-profile Russian cyber-enabled data leaks during the election. Pause. What do you think they mean by that?
Wait, I'm sorry, read that again for me.
The activities did coincide with high-profile Russian cyber-enabled data leaks during the election. What do you think they're referencing there?
The DCCC, DNC leaks?
Okay, and it says, and then comma, which we assess probably were intended to cause psychological effects, such as undermining the credibility of the election process and candidates. In other words, it's saying that both of these things, the leaking of the WikiLeaks shit and stuff like that, and this, weren't done to affect one candidate or the other. It was to undermine the process and both candidates. Would you like to admit that you're wrong about this?
No, you're not understanding it. I can read you from a prior PBD, or we can go through as many of these as you want. So, in the one for the one for September 14th.
What does that have to do with what
because
I just
read? Because the subject matter here is not whether they prefer one or another. It's what is the goal of the hack.
Just said
right?
what the
So
goal
on the one
was.
for September 14th, cyber threats to U.S. elections unlikely to alter voting outcomes. We assess that foreign adversaries do not have the capability to covertly overturn the vote outcome of the coming U.S. presidential election by executing cyber attacks on election infrastructure. These adversaries, most notably Russia, can conduct cyber operations against election infrastructure to undermine the credibility of the process and weaken the perceived legitimacy of the winning candidate. Okay, so what they're tasked with finding finding here is if they were to attack our voting systems, what would the goal of the attack be? Would it be to change the winner from one to another, or would it just be to undermine the process? And when they're looking at their types of attacks that they can do against the voting infrastructure, they're saying that they can do small attacks, but it's not going to be ones to like hack or rig the whole election. It would be to undermine the process itself. But they're not tasked with figuring out why is he trying to favor Trump? Is he trying to favor Hillary? Or is he trying to just favor chaos in general? This is just tasked with what is the capability of their attacks on the election infrastructure.
That's not true. So it's, although you might be reading something from September that says that, you're ignoring the context and the specific wording that's being used in this December 8th briefing. Now, I'll remind you that it is talking specifically about the leaks. And yes, they are tasked with finding the motivations. It's not just saying, well, when it comes to hacking voter rolls, it's just to mess with the system. The mess with the system part is the motivation. And the motivation it says here, let me finish, the motivation that it says here when it comes to getting into voting rolls and shit like that, and I'm quoting, high-profile Russia cyber-enabled data leaks were to, quote, intended to cause psychological effects such as undermining the credibility of the election process and candidates. Nowhere did it ever say that it was to prefer Donald Trump. Will you concede that?
Okay. I will concede this entire point to you.
Thank you.
Every single intelligence agency was tasked with this, if you can give me one example from a credible person saying that Obama changed their conclusion that Putin favored one candidate over the other, has any evidence whatsoever been released of that? Because what you're saying is that the entire intelligence community saw one thing, and the singular meeting with every cabinet level official related to the intelligence community on December 8th, December 9th, that Obama changed their direction there. Is there a single shred of evidence relating to that?
First off, will you concede that in order for some sort of conspiracy or something like that to occur, you wouldn't need someone admitting it to be able to say that it occurred?
I just need give me a single shred of evidence.
I will give you evidence.
Give me the strongest piece of evidence you have. The one, don't say a bunch of random things and then say, oh, here's wrong. You need the strongest piece of evidence you have for that.
Okay. There were only 3 things that the ICA used to say that Russia preferred Trump, and all 3 of them were so low confidence that they'd been known about prior and weren't included in prior ICAs. And all of a sudden, Brennan directly gets involved, and now they are included.
How is that evidence of Obama telling Brennan to do anything? Do we have any evidence whatsoever of that?
What it shows is it's clear that prior to December 9th, that the ICA or that the intelligence community was like, yeah, we're not ruling the motivation was this. Obama calls this meeting. Within that day, there were leaks to the Washington Post that said that the intelligence community assessment would say that Russia wanted Trump to win. And in addition to that, we then see all this shady shit being included.
Wait, hold on. Is that what those leaks said? Is that what the leaks to the... According to who?
What leaks? The Washington Post leak? You want me to read it?
Yeah. What was that Washington Post article?
Sure.
Yeah.
So December 9th, Obama reorders this, as we already read, which you said didn't occur. We proved that that was the case. Just like you said that
You said reorders it. I'm sorry, we'll relitigate as much as you want. Your claim is that there was an ICA that was given. Now you've backtracked to saying, there was a President Daily briefing that was given, and now you ordered a new thing. I agree with that. That was my original thing. So if you come to my position, that's fine. There was no new ICA issue. There are only 2 that we're talking about. So we agree that there's 2. That's fine. Okay. So now read me this Washington Post article.
You relitigating. I never said it was an ICA. I specifically said it wasn't an ICA.
That's what we were arguing over initially.
That's not true.
Oh, so you were saying that the claim was that Obama ordered an ICA after getting a presidential daily briefing?
Correct.
What's the big deal about that then? There's nothing noteworthy. Okay, well then fine. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing noteworthy about that.
What I was saying was that the evidence that was going to be released public, whether or not it was an ICA or just an intelligence briefing that was going to be released public, that showed that the motivations weren't for Russia to help Trump, was something that was then stymied. Then the next day, Obama said, I want a new ICA. And within that day, leaks to the Washington Post started. Yes. Washington Post story. Quote, this is from December 9th, the same day. By the way, you originally said that Obama didn't order this on December 9th. That was proven not to be true.
I never said that. I said that he didn't scrub a prior ICA in favor of this one, but go ahead.
So it says, quote, Washington Post, the CIA has concluded in a secret assessment that Russia intervened in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump win the presidency rather than just to undermine confidence in the U.S. electoral system, according to officials briefed on the matter. Literally the day that Obama orders a new ICA, you've already conceded that prior to this, there was no assessment from the CIA, FBI, or any intelligence agency.
They hadn't ordered an assessment.
Okay, so then
there was that ICA hadn't been ordered. A president's daily briefing is not the intelligence community's assessment of an entire thing. The last assessment had been done in September.
So you acknowledge there was a prior ICA? Yes?
In September, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So would you also acknowledge that ICA did not say that Russia interfered to help Trump?
Correct.
So then my statement is correct that says prior to December 9th, there was no ICA, there was no intelligence community assessment that said, whether it be from the CIA, FBI, or anywhere else, that said that Russia was interfering to help Trump. You concede that's true?
I'm not conceding. Yeah, I agree. That's the factual record.
Okay,
correct.
so then...
But you're acting like this, like President daily briefings are not like published. You keep saying that like Obama stymied something. These aren't published to the public or anything.
Okay, nonetheless, here's what the Washington Post argument says, right? It says, the CIA has concluded, this is December 9th, the same day, immediately following Obama saying, I want a new ICA. Now we're getting leaks to the Washington Post that says the CIA has concluded in a secret assessment that Russia intervened in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump win the presidency rather than to just undermine confidence in the U.S. electoral system, according to officials briefed on the matter. We would then see stories within days from the New York Times, other news outlets that would pick up this story almost immediately. So what happened was the narrative prior to December 8th was Russia's just meddling in the system. Even with these data leaks, it's just a hurt confidence.
On that Washington Post story, why did they say that? What was the sentence right after? Not just to undermine the U.S. political process more generally. The Post report cites officials who say they have identified individuals connected to the Russian government who gave WikiLeaks emails hacked from the Democratic National Committee and top Hillary Clinton aide John Podesta. One official described the conclusion that this was intended to help Trump as the consensus view. That was a change. In September, they didn't have a high confidence that that hack was Russian. At this point, they had that confidence.
First off, no, that's not true. You don't have any evidence that they did more research. If that was the case, then why was President getting presidential daily briefing meetings the day before that said that the conclusion wasn't that they were trying to help Trump?
That's not, they weren't tasked with that. They were tasked with what kind of attacks were being done on the election infrastructure. They were being tasked with exploring what Russia's motivations were. And
yet you've already conceded that they spoke to the motivation when they said that the motivation was to undermine confidence in both candidates.
It wasn't about picking one candidate or another. It was the motivation to change the outcome of the election or to just cause mayhem in general. It wasn't, do they prefer one candidate or another? It was, what was the goal of, like, what kinds of attacks were they doing? That's what it was tasked with finding.
Okay, well, we do keep looping on this, and we do have to have, like, a statement. Like, Rob, do you think that they actually were trying to... do you think that they actually had evidence one way or the other and that they had cleared this, that they knew that they were not trying to help one candidate over the other at the September report?
I think it has nothing to do with clearing. I think that they came to the conclusion that there was no evidence that they could show that suggested that with any confidence whatsoever that Russia was trying to interfere to help Trump. In fact, to the contrary, as the December 8th daily briefing shows, it was just like they always do to meddle in the system. However, here's the important part.
You have no evidence of this, right? I just want to be clear. There's no evidence of what you're inserting. You have no evidence of what you're inserting.
That's not true. I have evidence. The first piece of evidence that I'm suggesting here is literally that day we see leaks from the intel community saying there's already an intelligence consensus that Russia did this to interfere to help Trump. That's what the Washington Post.
Why couldn't it be that at that point they'd figured out with a high degree of confidence that the Podesta and the DNC email hacks were done by Russia, that they knew that with a high degree of confidence? That would significantly change the assessment, wouldn't it?
Yeah, real quick, Destiny, was there new evidence? Was there more information from September to December that would have changed?
Yes, of course. Yes, they had been doing more. They had there was a private company that came in, I think, for the DNC, I think, and either the FBI and the CIA had been doing its own whatever their fucking intelligence gathering bullshit is. But by that point, the confidence level changed. I believe that first assessment, I think they say low to medium or something, that they don't have high confidence, but by January they have high confidence that those hacks were done by Russia. And we know now that they were done by Russia.
Do you think that the evidence that they gathered between September and December, do you think that this was enough evidence for them to actually change their minds, or that it could have?
No, it can't be, because we could see exactly what they included in the ICA to suggest that they now were saying that Russia was doing this to help Trump. Now, I want to be clear. Destiny's full of shit. What he's arguing here is that Barack Obama says, okay, everyone, I want you to come together with all these agencies and come up with motivation and everything. And before they even get started, before they start, we're already seeing leaks that night that says there's a consensus. We know that Russia did this to help Trump. And Destiny's like, yep, they had it figured out by then. It took them like 2 hours from when they were tasked with doing this by saying, yep, there's a consensus. Despite the fact that we see people in the Durham Annex from like actual people in the CIA. There were 5 people at the CIA working on this. 2 of them were constantly pushing back against Brennan like, look, dude, we don't see it. We don't see this evidence. And yet, Destiny's like, no. It was all figured out within 2 hours. The consensus was done.
Okay, so So while that's mentioned in the first report, what do you believe the intent or the goal of the first report was? Because Destiny's saying that was not what they were tasked with for the first report. So what do you think that the first report, like,
wait, to be clear, let me be clear. The first report was tasked, I think, with asking all sorts of questions. An ICA is an intelligence community assessment altogether on the whole thing,
correct,
right? But the president daily briefings were what they were concerned about was literally like election security. Like, are all of our voting machines going to get hacked?
You're saying this would be more specific?
Yeah, the President Daily Briefings just had to do with like, is Russia trying to attack our systems? Like, what's going on there? But it's not like a whole intelligence community assessment on like, what are the motivations of Putin? What's he trying to do in terms of, does he prefer one leader or another? That's a broader assessment that requires a deeper level of intelligence analysis.
The difference is an ICA is sort of an official document that's put together. The Presidential Daily Briefing could be on anything. It's not necessarily from the intelligence community. This PBD was the evidence that the intelligence community had at the time to speak to what Russia did, what they were capable of, and what their motivations were. And that assessment in December 8th
Wait,
said—
the President Daily Briefing included every single thing the intelligence community knew about Russia's motivations for the election intrusion stuff? That 2-page document?
No.
The 2-page PDP was all the intelligence. Then what was that statement?
Well, what I'm saying is that the Presidential Daily Briefings could be a bunch of things, right? It doesn't have to be intelligence, right? It could be a PBD on here's what the CPI is this year.
Yeah, whatever
right?
he wants to. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
That's president. So it's not the same as an official ICA. However, this particular PBD was seeking to inform about what Russia did in the election. It was giving a brief summary. An ICA is going to be more intensive. This is just sort of like what you would expect to see in a summary of an ICA. And what this summary said was, look, they tried to hack like election infrastructure. We don't think they were successful. There's no evidence that they were able to change any votes or anything like that. And just like when they leaked all this stuff, like with WikiLeaks and shit like that, we think that their motivation was that they're just trying to mess with the system and disparage both candidates. That's what it said. And your argument's like,
wait, it didn't say disparage. It never said disparage both candidates. You're adding that word.
The word,
okay.
the specific word was
undermine, right?
Let me see the specific. This is hilarious. Undermining.
It says, which we assess probably were intended to cause psychological effects, such as undermining the credibility of the election process and candidates.
Oh, so okay, it didn't say disparage. It said undermine credibility of. I mean, it's a fucking joke, Destiny. Come on. You do this shit all the time, the semantic game. So, okay, my bad. It didn't say disparage the candidate. It said undermine the credibilities of the candidates. Like, so, and Destiny, he knows he's fucking wrong about this. He knows that he's just like, well, just because they said what the motivation was, Obama didn't specifically ask them and tax them with saying what the motivation was, so we shouldn't count that. Now, again, on December 9th, what we see is immediately when Obama's like, no, that's not going to work for me, brother.
Just before I move on from this, because I guess, so for Tom, I don't know if you have to make a ruling or what, because obviously we disagree massively here. So my statement is that this Presidential Daily Briefing, this was not an in-depth exploration of what Putin was doing or what his motivations were for disrupting the election. This was basically an assessment of what types of attacks can we expect, or what types of attacks do we think occurred in this election, right? And the sourcing on this is literally just the first paragraph of this daily briefing is, we assess that Russian and criminal actors did not impact recent U.S. election results by conducting malicious cyber activities against election infrastructure. They talk about the compromise of an Illinois voter registration database and an unsuccessful attempt in other states. Okay, and then they say election monitoring and the type of systems targeted, infrastructure not used to cast or count votes, make it highly unlikely that it would have resulted in altering any state's official vote result. Criminal activity also failed to reach the scale and sophistication necessary to change election outcomes. New election technology in the future that decreases diversity in systems and expands computer-enabled functions provides additional avenues to manipulate votes, but it will remain a significant challenge to sway elections through cyber means. This daily briefing was asking, were they able to change the outcome of the election? And one of these, the one that Rob is reading off, that he's saying, oh, this is about the motivations. It was them saying, we have low to moderate confidence in the Russian government's involvement because of our uncertainty about its utility for a state actor, a lack of observed effects from the low-profile operation, and the actors' use of obfuscation techniques, which included substantial overlap with criminal actors using similar targeting patterns and tactics. The activities did coincide with high-profile Russian cyber-enabled data leaks during the election, which we assess probably were intended to cause psychological effects, such as undermining the credibility of the election process and candidates. So that statement there is saying that they weren't trying to change the outcome of the election for one candidate or another. They were just trying to, the hacks targeting things were more related to psychological effects, such as, they're not saying they tried to do both. They were saying, such as, here's examples of psychological effects. One psychological effect would be undermining the credibility. Another psychological effect might be undermining the candidates. Now, in a later assessment, we find out they were trying to undermine one candidate. But this assessment is not about Putin's motivations. And you can see that throughout this entire President Daily Briefing. No other part of this is going to address Putin's motivations. And the idea that they would include such an important tidbit of information in one sentence, in one bullet point about a PDB that's not really related to that at all is actually kind of funny. I guess unless you haven't read the context of any of the ICAs that have come out since this.
Okay, so So interesting strategy here. Destiny's hoping if he reads a bunch of words really fast, he'll be able to employ some smoke and mirrors so that you don't read the actual language that this says. This is a 3-page summary of what the intelligence community has found. They were talking about the things that they were able to do, such as hacking the DNC and those sort of cyber hacks that they had, hacking sort of voter registration rolls, attempts to do that. And they said that the motivation with this, just like the motivation with the DNC leaks and all of that stuff, was to undermine the candidate's credibility and to sow psychological warfare and distrust in our system. That's what they said. Destiny could read as fast as he wants a bunch of other shit saying, no, actually, you shouldn't trust that because what they're talking about specifically is the fact that they're trying to undermine the election system through election infrastructure and things like that. So yeah, even though it says that they're undermining the credibility here, it doesn't really matter. None of that fucking matters. Destiny's trying to employ smoke and mirrors. I will read it again to you slowly because I don't have to rush through it like some fucking asshole so that you don't understand the language. It says, and I quote, "The activities did coincide with high-profile Russian cyber-enabled data leaks during the election, which we assess probably were intended to cause psychological effects such as undermining the credibility of the election process and the candidates. When all else fails, just read a bunch of irrelevant shit really fast and say that this line doesn't matter. He'll have you believe that this was just an accident. They accidentally included this. It clearly wasn't what they intended to say. Or he'll say, oh, it didn't say that they disparaged the candidates. That's wrong, Rob. It said it undermined the credibility of the candidates. It's a fucking joke. The point is, this was what Obama was looking at. The next day, he calls a meeting and says, I need a new ICA. And within that evening, there are leaks to the Washington Post, which would then go out to the New York Times and other places saying, it's it. We've reached a consensus. The intelligence community's reached a consensus hours after Obama tasked us with this. Yep, it turns out, unlike everything we've said previously, the motivation was to help Trump Russia. Or to help Trump from Russia. Now, we could get into the 3 pieces of evidence that we've been stalling for the past hour if you want that shows how weak and flimsy this argument was. Would you like to move there, Destiny?
Well, let me ask
we've
you a
got both
question
of our
real quick.
interpretations up.